I use mostly hardwoods in my builds, but sometimes plywood is the best option due to either cost or stability. The only problem with it is the exposed plywood edge. There are a ton of ways to cover this up, so I wanted to experiment with a few methods. Huge thank you to this week's sponsors, WD-40 and Audible. More about them later on in the video. So the easiest and most common method is iron-on edge banding that you could purchase in a store. I personally don't love this method for my projects, so I'm just going to skip over that one. But if you want a thin veneer edge banding to match your project, here's a really cool way to make your own. With this method, all you need is a scrap piece from the project that you're working on and set the blade so that it's slightly higher than your material. Then all you have to do is move your fence so that the blade will cut right underneath that veneer on the plywood. Now all I need to do is cut it loose. Okay, so that's a pretty cool way to make some thin veneer edge banding to match the wood species of the project that you're working on. I don't really love the idea of a thin veneer for heavy use projects, so let's move on to something stronger. Hardwood edging. So this is a super simple process. You just mill your piece to be slightly thicker than the plywood that you're using just to give it a little bit of room, and then adjust your fence so that it will cut a piece 1/4 inch thick. Then all you need to do is glue it on. And no specialized clamps here, you could just use some tape. And once this dries, I could just flush it up with a flush trim bit or a block plane to even it all up. So while this is great for a ton of projects, I think we could do a little bit better by adding some joinery to the mix. The next method I'm going to try is a tongue and groove at the router table with a slot cutting bit, but this could also be done with a dado stack at the table saw. To do this, I'll start with the groove in the plywood first, and I will lower the bit until the cutters are in the middle of the board. And now I will adjust the fence so the cutter is sticking out about 1/4 inch. And make the cut. For the mating tongue piece, once again, I milled a piece that's slightly thicker than the plywood and I ripped it to an arbitrary width. It's safer to use thicker material when you're doing this, so you can use a push block and then rip it to final size afterwards. Also, a plus side of doing this is that you can do the tongue on this side and on the other side, and you can do 2 pieces at one time. Now I'm going to lower the bit so that if I cut the tongue piece on both sides, it will create the perfect size tongue to fit into that groove. And I'm going to nudge the fence like ever so slightly towards me just to leave some extra room in the joint for some glue. Now I should probably do a test cut here first, but I won't. Now let's see how that fits. Oh, perfect. I didn't need to do any test cuts. Okay, so while I was doing this, I actually thought of another way that I could do this without having to adjust the bit height. If I set up the bit so that it's in the center of the plywood again, like the first cut that I made, instead of changing the bit to create a tongue, I could just create another groove for the mating piece. Then I cut a 1/4 inch piece of plywood to 1/2 inch wide to fit inside both of those 1/4 inch deep grooves, creating a spline. So this is just like the, there we go. This is just like the tongue and groove, just without having to adjust the bit height on the router table, but there is that extra setup of cutting this piece of plywood. What's really great about these methods is that it's going to be super strong and it won't break off like just a thin banding or a veneer. And you can also cut this to be any width you want and then add some edge profiling like a deep bevel or a round over or an OG, whatever you want. So I do see one downside to this. When you look up closely, even after gluing, there will be a seam. So I want to try another method that's going to be just as strong, but also seamless. I came across a video from Stumpy Nubs where he made really cool edging using a Vgroove bit at the router table. I don't have one that's large enough to be able to do it the way that he did it, so I'm going to try to attempt to do the same kind of thing on the table saw. I'll tilt the blade till it's about 30 degrees or so, and then I'm going to run the board through until there's going to be a point on one edge. I probably should have marked the center of this board first. I'll just keep adjusting the fence until the blade gets to that center line. Now the board has a point on the edge of it. Now I just need to make the mating edging groove that's going to go in the side of the plywood. This is going to be the hard part. I don't want to mess with the angle of the blade because I want it to completely match up. But now that I know the perfect center of this board, I am going to lower the blade so the top is right by that center line. Now I'll need to set up a sacrificial fence here so that the left-hand side of the blade is just popping up from this sacrificial fence here. Should I do a test piece first? Or should I just go for it? Let's go for it. So making this V-groove on the table saw was actually way easier than I thought it was going to be. Thought I was totally going to have to do multiple test cuts, but got it on the first try. And this piece fits right into here. And when you cut this piece right where the angles start, the joint would be pretty seamless. I'm going to do that in a bit, and I'll show you guys what that's going to look like. But not sure that I love this because cutting this point could be a little bit finicky, especially if you have a bunch of material that's different widths. You have to just like keep adjusting the fence. So let's try another method. The next method I'm going to try is a combination between the tongue and groove and the V-groove using this 60-degree edge banding bit set from Tools Today. I'm super excited to try this out. But before I get to using these, I want to make sure that these bits are going to last me for a long time. Sometimes you might feel like your router bits have gone dull because they're leaving burn marks and they're just not cutting like they used to. Chances are they're not dull, they're just dirty. So pitch and resin builds up on router bits over time, over regular use. And you can keep cleaning these bits to make them like new again, or you can just prevent the pitch and resin from building up. Simply spray some WD-40 Specialist Dirt and Dust Resistant Dry Lube onto a clean bit. It dries super quick and there will be no oily residue once it's dry, so it's safe to use around a dusty shop because no sawdust is going to cling to it. Now that the bits are coated, it will prevent pitch and resin from building up on the bits, which will reduce friction, create less burning, cleaner cuts, and less frustrating moments in the shop. All right, let's set these up. This set comes with two bits that when used together creates the tongue and groove and the V-groove at the same time. I'm going to use this bit first, which is the tongue part of the joint. I'll set up the bit so the center of this tongue cutting part is going to be in the center of this board. That's about right. And adjust the fence so that the tongue is going to be cutting in line with the fence. That way, when the tongue is cut, there's going to be support at the fence here. Now I just swapped out to the matching groove bit. And there were no instructions in here, but I think just matching it up with the tongue would make sense. And I will just adjust the fence so that it's hitting the bearing. Again, assuming. Actually, I'm going to bring the fence in, and I'm going to do this in multiple passes to get the correct depth. Very, very cool. I totally thought that I was going to need to double stick tape a sacrificial straight edge onto the piece as it was going onto the outfeed because there's a very thin veneer that's left over on the corner of these cuts here, but totally didn't need it. This cut is amazing. So let's see how that fits. Awesome. Super happy with this. This is a super strong joint. I'm just gonna go finish all these up now by cutting down the edging to size, gluing them up, and sanding. This could get to be a pretty tedious process, so I need some extra entertainment and motivation. So I'm listening to Nick Offerman's Good Clean Fun audiobook on Audible. Using the Audible app is really easy to use, and with a membership, you have access to the largest selection of audiobooks on the planet. When you become a member, you'll get one free audiobook a month and 30% off all regularly priced audiobooks. And if that's not enough, you also get credit for 2 Audible originals every month. These are exclusive audiobooks that you can't get anywhere else but Audible. What's really cool is that you get to keep all of your audiobooks, so you can go back and listen anytime, even if you cancel your membership. Even cooler, if you don't like the audiobook you chose, you can swap it for something else. No questions asked. So as we embark on a new year, Audible is issuing a New Year's challenge. If you finish 3 audiobooks by March 3rd, they will send you a $20 Amazon credit. So that's 3 by 3 and you'll get 20. So head on over to audible.com/Tamar or text Tamar to 500-500 to start your free 30-day trial today. That trial includes 1 free audiobook and 2 free Audible originals. I'm hoping that listening to Nick Offerman while I'm working in my shop is going to help me become a better woodworker this year. So head on over to audible.com/Tamar or text Tamar to 500-500 to start listening to something that will inspire you to achieve your goals this year today. After the glue dried, I flushed up the faces of the hardwood with the plywood using a flush trim bit at my router table. This could be done with a handheld router, a block plane. I think it could also be done at the table saw. And then once that was flush, I could trim all the edges to size. Now here's the best part about doing joinery like this for the edge banding. I'm going to be able to put a deep bevel on this piece. And now the cool part about doing joinery with the Vgroove is that hopefully I will be able to get as close as possible to the joint. All right, that's pretty cool. Let me do the other one. Now that everything's flushed up, let's take a closer look. Here's the thin edge banding. While this is a really cool way to get edge banding that matches the material that you're working with, I don't really see this as super strong, but I'm sure it would be great for some projects. The hardwood edge banding, this is great for a ton of projects. I've used this before for a lot of projects and it's worked out great, but I just like some of these other methods better, like this tongue and groove. How great is that? So you know that this is going to be super strong and it's not going to break off at all, and you're able to add a cool edge detail profile like you can't do with regular edge banding. Really like this method. And I guess that's the same with the spline because it's basically the same thing. I would prefer to do the tongue and groove over the spline though, because it's just easier for me to stay at the router table. Now the Vgroove. This one is really cool because there's a ton of glue surface in there, so you know it's going to be strong, and you could also flush it up right next to the plywood so it makes a seamless joint. But I didn't love the process of making this on the table saw. Maybe if I had that right bit for the router table, I would like this one better, but I like this one the absolute best, the edge banding bit set. This is super strong because of the tongue and groove and the angles going on in there. And you could also flush it right up against the plywood, and it's pretty seamless. It's as seamless as you get, and being super strong, stronger than edge banding. This is definitely going to be the way that I'm going to make my edge banding for future projects. So I'm curious to know which methods you guys like best here. Also, if you have any other methods that I didn't cover here, I would love to hear them. So let me know down below. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.